Let's continue in these fundamentals for the Sunni intellectual. Now I want to back up a little bit, read some of what we went over last time, and then go forward from there. So we want to talk now about causes of knowledge. We talked about knowledge, and we talked about its types. We said there's necessary knowledge and there's inferred knowledge. We said the necessary knowledge is knowledge that you know it without having to think about it. And inferred knowledge is knowledge that you know it by thinking about it. And then someone sent me a question. Is there a third type of knowledge? So if you understand the definitions, then it means there's no third type. Because first type is knowledge that you know without thinking about it. Second type is knowledge that you know by thinking about it. So what's left? There's nothing left after that. So that's why you need to pay attention and you need to think twice. Don't ask just anything that crosses your mind. Sometimes the answer will be given to you and you didn't let the information soak into yourself so that you could know the answer. Or if you would review your lesson, you'll find the answer is there. So what causes knowledge then? We already read this ayah from the Quran, which is the 78th ayah of Surah An-Nahl. وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah brought you from the bellies of your mothers not knowing anything. You come out of your mother's bellies while not knowing anything. And He made hearing, sight, and hearts for you so that you would be thankful, so that you would appreciate. He created tools for the ignorant newborn by which he would achieve knowledge. That's what this ayah tells us. Senses and a heart, which is the true location of the mind, the heart. And a heart, which is the true location of the mind. Last week when we read this, looks like someone read the statement senses and the heart, which is the true location of the mind, meaning senses and the heart. But that way of understanding the sentence doesn't work because of the verb is. Is, that's singular. So it means we're talking about one thing. One thing is the true location of the mind, which is the true location of the mind. Did I say true location of the heart? Senses in the heart, which is the true location of the mind. So if the true location of the mind was senses and the heart, if that's what was meant by the sentence, then it should say, which are the true locations of the mind, because this is more than one thing here. And Nasafi, the interpreter, Abdullah ibn Ahmad, said, Allah did not create these things in you but as tools for removing the ignorance with which you were born and for getting knowledge to apply. That's clear, I think. And the other Nasafi, the theologian, Abu Hafs Umar, said, there are three causes of knowledge for the creations. There are three causes of knowledge for the creations. Whether that's necessary knowledge or inferred knowledge. Sound senses, here, let's say, accurate news or accurate information, and intellect. Okay, so he tells us three causes of knowledge for creations. God doesn't need something to cause knowledge for him. God has the eternal, beginningless, uncreated knowledge. So it's just the same word, and it means its meaning is altogether different. The creations need something to cause knowledge for them. God doesn't need something to cause knowledge for him. The creations Imam An-Nasafi told us, have three causes of knowledge: sound senses, accurate news, and intellect. But if we go back to the ayah, out of the three that An-Nasafi told us, how many did the ayah tell us? وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. He gave you sense, he gave you hearing and sight, so that's senses. So that's one out of three. وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ, and hearts, that's the place of the mind, so it refers to the mind here. That's two out of three. And then the third one's not mentioned here in this ayah, accurate news. So this ayah only addresses two out of the three: senses and mind. This theologian said there are three: senses, accurate news, and the mind. But you should know that accurate news, in the end of the day, goes back to what? Goes back to the senses. Accurate news goes back to the senses. Because it's going to be, for example, someone told you, and you listened to him. You heard him. So it goes back to senses. So fundamentally, most fundamentally, there's two ways for us: senses and a mind. And we want today to talk about the senses, insha'Allah ta'ala. And again, this is a lesson that some of you have had before. The repetition will be good for you. And some of you, maybe you never heard this before. And it's going to be good for you to learn it for the first time also. So the author says, knowledge by any of the five senses is necessary. Yani, necessary knowledge. What's necessary knowledge? What's necessary knowledge? The necessary knowledge is knowledge that you get without having to think about it. So the knowledge that you get from any of your five senses is knowledge that you don't have to think about to have it. If those senses were sound senses, so being sound is a condition. As opposed to what? As opposed to unsound senses. Unsound senses could be by extreme desert heat. So a person is he's under the oppressive heat of the sun in the desert. So he starts to hallucinate. So now he can't trust what he sees. So this one is not included here. This one does not gain knowledge by his seeing. Because he sees, he perceives something that's not there. He basically has a malfunction. He's hallucinating. Or by intoxication. This could impair one's senses. Especially that one of the words that the scholars use for drugs in Arabic is mukhaddir. Mukhaddir means number, something that numbs. If I spell it out, it's going to come out like the word number, but the B is silent. Number, N-U-M-B, silent B-E-R, number. So what does it mean? It's a number, that the drug is a number. It means that dulls your senses. And maybe some of those drugs will amplify your senses. Not either way, you can't rely on them now. They say that why does the drunk person speed? Because he can't feel the pedal under his foot. So he presses harder so he can feel the pedal. That's what they say. Also, what is seen through a filter like glass may appear closer or larger than it truly is. So that means then you don't have true knowledge. because you're not seeing it as it is. Meaning, when you get a microscope and you look at something so small, but it appears to you that it's very large or much bigger than it really is. The fact that you see it bigger than it really is, that means you're not seeing it as it is, because it's not that big, really. What appears to you, what your own self registers, is that it's large, maybe as large as a penny or as large as a dime. And really, it's so small, so you're not seeing it as it really is. Knowledge is to know something as it is, to realize something as it is. Knowledge is realizing something as it is. If someone looks at the moon through a telescope, so looks much closer, and he can see so many details. So without this knowledge, he'd think that now he has knowledge because he can see a lot of stuff that he couldn't see with his naked eye. But according to the definition, knowledge is to perceive something as it is, really. So when you looked at it through the filter, which is the telescope, you perceived it closer than it really is. So that means you're not perceiving it as it really is. And if you look at the telescope through the other way, or the binoculars, looks further than it really is. So looking at something through a filter is not the sound senses that we're talking about. When we talk about sound senses here, we're talking about normal naked sense, bare sense, normal sense, without the aid of tools and the like, without filter, without malfunction. This is one of the arguments that the scholars made when debunking the crucifixion that the Christians claim happened to Jesus. They say he was seen from afar, whoever was on this pole. The man who was hung up on a pole was seen from afar. That makes it more obscure, makes it less reliable. And we say filter, that's like water also, seeing something through water. And what you see on television or computer screen, that's an illusion altogether, a type of illusion. Yani, if you saw on the movie so-called King Kong or Godzilla or Transformers, you know it's not real, but you see something there. So what are you seeing there? That's a type of illusion. Even pictures of regular people, like when you watch the news on your screen, and there's news anchors sitting behind the desk, talking, giving the news, very normal stuff. That's an illusion still. And what you're really looking at is pixels. Therefore, it is not a true witnessing that promotes definitive knowledge. Don't they have that notice on the rear view window or rear view mirror? Warning, objects may appear closer than they are when you look in the rear view. It's giving you that warning so that you can make the adjustment, so that in your own self you can make the adjustment and not gauge wrongly the distance, because you're not seeing it as it is. النسفي said, وَبِكُلِّ حَاسَّةٍ مِنْهَا يُوقَفُ عَلَى مَا وُضِعَتْ هِيَ لَهُ كَالسَّمْعِ وَالذَّوْقِ وَالشَّمِّ. Each sense's function is to detect something in particular, like hearing sounds, tasting flavors, and smelling odors. These senses do not normally detect what is out of their range. But that is not impossible. Are you unaware that Allah gave the Prophet's heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the power of sight? And also, are you unaware that Allah enabled the mountain to see in the story of Moses, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So, if Allah could give the Prophet's heart the power of vision and also create in a mountain vision, then we know that whatever our senses detect, they're only detecting them by God's creating and doing something that's normal and not necessary. Yani, to see with your eyes is normal, not necessary. To hear with your ears is normal, not necessary, etc. So the word normal is important here. These senses do not normally detect what is out of their range, but that is not impossible. It's not impossible for them to abnormally detect what is out of their range usually. This is because none of those organs have any actual effect in reality. That means they do not create. Your organs do not create. Your eyes don't create. Your ears, your nose, your tongue, none of that creates anything. If Allah willed, you would not see what is before your very eyes. Like what happened to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in more than one occasion. Like when the wicked woman Jamil was looking for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to harm him. He was sitting right next to Abu Bakr. She came to Abu Bakr and said, "Where's your friend?" He said to her, she was one-eyed woman. He said to her, "You don't see anyone here with me?" She said, "You mock me?" Yeah, the Prophet was right there. She couldn't see him, alayhi salatu wassalam. And also when some people, in the story of the Hijrah, right before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left to go to Abu Bakr's place so that they could make Hijrah, what happened? They surrounded the Prophet's house so that they could kill him. He came out of his house, he put dirt on all of their heads and left them standing there and kept going. They were still waiting for him to come out. So if Allah willed, you would not see what is before your very eyes. Probably any one of us, all of us maybe, have been looking for something one time and we didn't see it, although it was right there, right in front of us. The fact is that realization happens by the creating of Allah and nothing more. لا يطلع الإنسان على شيء حتى يطلعه الله عليه. One will never encounter anything until Allah makes him encounter it. One will never realize something until Allah makes him realize it. Doesn't matter how smart he is. If Allah didn't will for something to cross his mind, it will never cross his mind. If Allah didn't will for him to see or hear something, he will not see it or hear it. That woman's name was Jamil. She was the wife of Abu Lahab. She's that one in the surah. وَامْرَأَتُهُ حَمَّالَةَ الْحَطَبِ. So what are these senses? The five senses are, starting here with hearing. And when we say senses, we're talking about creations. Allah is not attributed with senses. His attributes are not called senses, and they're not senses. And his attributes are not powers. Our senses are powers, and Allah's attributes are not powers. But he has an attribute called power, and he has other attributes, and those attributes are not powers. The first sense is hearing. First in our list, that is. The power embedded in the nerves in the bottom of the ear canal, through which sounds are realized. This power embedded in the nerves in the bottom of the ear canal, through which sounds are realized. Sounds that reach the hearer by way of airwaves. Airwaves that are adapted to the manner of the sound. Those modified airwaves reach the ear canal, and upon that, Allah creates realization of the sound in the realizer. So what does this mean? Sound is an attribute of bodies. That means it doesn't exist independently. And sound, it doesn't have atoms. Sound is not made of atoms. Sound does not fill its own space. Rather, sound is an attribute of the body that cannot exist independently of the body. So, yani, you need to take what I'm saying back to some basics that you learned, hopefully. Maybe some of you are now hearing this and you haven't even learned obligatory knowledge. But those of you who have learned obligatory knowledge and who have learned Aqidah over the years, for example, you know there's two types of creations. There are things of volume that fill their own space, like a pen fills its own space right next to the other pen, and a computer, and a table, and a floor, each one with its own space, and each one independent of the other, distinct from the other, filling its own space. And the other type of creation is the property or properties of such volumes, like moving and stillness and temperature. And amongst the properties of things that have volume is sound. Sound occurs when two bodies come together. Now, we're saying here sound doesn't have an independent existence, so that means doesn't fill a space by itself. So then how does the sound, if you're talking to someone, how does the sound from his body, how do you perceive it? How do you perceive the sound that comes from the other person's body? According to me, I'm telling you, Yani, I didn't make it up, but I'm the one who's telling you. That's why I'm saying according to me. As the one who's telling you, but I didn't make this information up, according to me, the sound doesn't even leave the body of the one who's making the sound. So if the sound does not leave the body of the one who's making the sound, then how, if someone speaks to you right in front of your face, how can you hear him? The answer is that the air around the body, the air around whatever's making the sound, modifies, it adapts to the sound. This air adapts to the sound. So the air is basically a circuit. The air itself is a circuit. So a body makes a sound, and this triggers the air around the body, and the air will move away from the body that's making the sound. That air, that triggered air will then make its way to your ear and make its way to the nerves in the bottom of your ear canal. And then Allah will create in you the realization of the sound. Meaning, He will make you hear it. He will create in you hearing it, if He will, of course. If He will. Sight is the power deposited in the hollow nerves that meet at the brain and diverge at the eyes, or if you want, they converge at the brain from the eyes. Two nerves, hollow nerves that go from your eyes and converge at the brain. By this power, colors, shapes, and other things are realized by Allah's creating, not because the eye creates. One would realize by sight, color, shapes, also motion and stillness, also distance. You might not always be able to gauge distance by sight, though, especially if you're seeing a moving object coming towards you, like a car. If you see it coming head on towards you, you might not be able to gauge its distance because it's moving. It's moving faster than you can, its angle of approach, its speed and its angle of approach could likely defy your ability to perceive its distance. In this case of sight, and I'm talking here normally, the circuit is the light. In the case of hearing, the circuit was the air. The sound triggered the air and the air moved. In this case of sight, and we're talking here normally, the circuit is the light. But if Allah willed, you will see in the dark. The third sense is smell. Smell is the power embedded in two protrusions at the front of the brain, resembling breast nipples. If that part's not clear for you, then maybe you need to learn some anatomy of the brain, and then you'll see. I didn't used to know, I just took this knowledge just the way the scholar said it. So I asked the doctor once, what's these protrusions in the brain resembling breast nipples? So the doctor didn't know also. So we looked together at some diagrams. And there was something we saw when we looked at, I don't know what you call it, like from underneath. Diagram looking at the brain from underneath. Because you could look at it from the top or from the side, right side, left side, from the front, from the back. So when we looked at the diagram from underneath, there's two things there, two protrusions there. So maybe that's the ones there. By this power, scents are realized by way of modified air. So also here in the case of smell, air is the circuit. The air reaches the nostrils and Allah creates the realization. So after I learned this, then I knew that what they show you on commercials is not true. What do they show you? They want to sell a product to you about a product that eliminates odors. So they will animate some pictures of some ugly looking circle things that's supposed to be bad smell. So these horrible looking, like, one might say looks like some bacteria or something that represents the bad smell. So it's not like that. The smell is not something that's made of particles. Smell is itself an attribute of the body. It's a property of the body. The smell, like the sound, doesn't leave the body. So if the smell doesn't leave the body, how would you smell the smell of someone else or something else? Same thing we said about hearing. The air adapts to the smell. The air around the body adapts to the smell, and then the air moves. The air will get to your nostrils, and if Allah willed, He will create in you realization of the smell. The fourth sense is taste, which is the power to detect a tasty thing's flavor. Tasty here means a thing with a flavor. Tasty here doesn't mean tastes good. Tasty means has a taste. That's what it means here. Taste is the power to detect a tasty thing's flavor, because some things, they don't have a flavor. Like if you stuck your tongue out and then I shine a flashlight on your tongue, will you taste the light? It's on your tongue. It's physically touching your tongue. Will you taste it? I don't think so. So you're only going to taste something if in the first place it has this property. Flavor is also another property of things with volume. And it could be that Allah creates a thing that has volume but does not create in it a property of flavor. So taste is the power to detect a tasty thing's flavor by nerves spread over the tongue. And different portions of the tongue are more sensitive to different flavors. Like one part of your tongue's more sensitive to salt, one part is more sensitive to sweet, and like that. Upon being mixed with salivary fluid, that means saliva, in the mouth and contacting the nerves, Allah creates the realization. So what's understood from this is that if there's no saliva on the tongue, you won't taste something. So according to this, then what's the circuit? The circuit is the saliva. And the fifth sense is the sense of feel or touch or sensation. It is a power spread throughout the body, realizing heat, cold, moisture, dryness, hunger, pain, and the like. Upon connection and touching, Allah creates the realization. So it's the contact itself that makes you realize in this case. So for hearing, the circuit is the air. For sight, the circuit is the light. For smell, the circuit is the air. For taste, the circuit is the saliva. And for touch, yani, the circuit is the contact itself. These five senses are obvious, and their existences are indisputable. So don't argue with someone who tells you something otherwise. I remember in third grade, don't you know how the kuffar say, it's your brain. You don't see, yeah, you don't feel something in the location where you feel it. Rather, it's your brain that tells you, for example, there's a pain in your arm. That's what they say. They will say, your brain tells you that something's wrong with your arm, and it seems to you that you feel it in your arm. So I learned that in third grade. I never believed it. I said to myself, why would I believe that I don't feel the pain in my arm when I feel it in my arm? They're telling me not that they're telling me I don't really feel it in my arm, and it's in my mind. It's my brain, rather. My brain tells me it's in my arm. There's a problem in my arm. I chose not to believe that because it was different from what I experienced. It was well enough for me that I could feel it in my arm. On the other hand, the extrasensory perception confirmed by philosophers is unconfirmed for Ahlul Sunnah. Extrasensory perception, something that philosophers talk about, which is a sixth sense. The talk about a sixth sense is philosophy. That's its origin. What is this sixth sense? It's something vague and not quite quantifiable. It's an extrasensory perception or a sixth sense. That's what it's called, the sixth sense. So what do we say about that? We say this is unconfirmed. We don't believe in it. Any question? So what type of knowledge do you get from your senses? Who can tell us? What type of knowledge do you get from your senses, your sound senses? Necessary knowledge, yes. Knowledge that you cannot fight off from yourself. Now, we have a little bit of time left. Not realization. There's two types of knowledge. Necessary knowledge and inferred knowledge. We still have some time left. The next heading is accurate news. Hold on. No. True reports. What is that? What when you said true reports? What are you talking about? Why are you mentioning that? I just want to make sure there's no mix-up here. That's why I'm asking you. I didn't even start reading about it yet, so I'm not sure why you're saying that. You said the accurate news is that two kinds. We didn't start yet. You got to let me start first. You can't go like that. Sheikh Samir will not let someone do like that. That's what I've seen from him. He wants to give the lesson a person wants to ask him before he even gets a chance to say something. Or a person wants to stop him to correct him, and he didn't even finish what he's saying. He said, by your senses, you get accurate news. Okay, but my question was, what kind of knowledge do you get from your senses? Accurate news is not knowledge. Knowledge is the attribute of a knower. The accurate news is not the attribute of the knower. What kind of knowledge do you get by your senses? Ya Aba Asiya. Wait, so the people already said the answer. Necessary knowledge. You get necessary knowledge by your sound senses. Now, the next heading is accurate news. We have a little bit of time left here. I want to attempt to squeeze in just what's under this heading. Then we'll stop. And the next heading is mutawatir, successive mass narration, mutawatir news. That's a type of accurate news. But it has its own details we won't be able to cover today. But maybe we can just cover this broad introduction to accurate news, and then next week we can talk about tawatur. You said I was saying one gets necessary knowledge and accurate news. Because how can one acquire accurate news without senses? Okay, you're not answering my question though. My question was, what kind of knowledge do you get from sound senses? So what's your answer? Just necessary knowledge. Accurate news is not knowledge. Accurate news causes knowledge. Accurate news causes knowledge. Is it clear for you? So let's see what we have here under this heading of accurate news. Know, O intelligent Muslim, that information is true or false. Information here means telling. Something told, Yani. Something told is true or false. This quote unquote something told, we're going to call that here information. Information is true or false. So this type of person would say, is there a third category? There's no third category. It's true or false. And therefore, not taken as granted. Information is not taken as granted. Yani should not be. Not if you're an intelligent Muslim. If you're a gullible person or an ignorant person, then you'll take it as granted. You'll take what you hear as for granted. Like people talking about something about the red cow for the Jews. And you're so interested in the Jews with the red cow. Why? This is a general statement, accepting of exception. What's the general statement? That information is true or false. Yani, one piece of information is either true or false. Or, information in general is true or false. But there's room for exception to that generality because news from God can only be true. News from God is impossibly false. Doesn't mean you know how to interpret it though. News from God is definitely true, doesn't mean you know its interpretation though. It's not going to be false because you don't know how to explain it. And whatever contradicts the news from God is impossibly true, could not be true. What contradicts news from God could not be true. And what contradicts the definitive mental judgments can only be false. Definitive mental judgment, like that God doesn't have a likeness. That has definitive mental evidence. Like that the world has a beginning. This has definitive mental evidence. Anything, any information, any news that contradicts the definitive mental judgment can only be false. But if we take these very few exceptions out, the exception of news from God, which can only be true, and the exception of what is contradicting definitive mental judgment, it can only be false. So we're going to remove these from our discussion now that we've addressed them. Now we want to talk about what's left. This broad scope of news, it can be true or false. Thus, if it were reported that Zayd stood, a man named Zayd stood up, then neither truth nor falsehood is more probable without an outside influence. Someone came to you and said, Zayd went to the store. They say, I don't know. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Neither truth nor falsehood is more what? Probable. We talked about that in the beginning. What does probable mean? Probable means likely, without an outside influence. In this arena, the religion provides the intelligent Muslim with hadith science, the science for authenticating reports. If you learn science of hadith, you'll be sharper than any journalist out there. All those so-called journalists, I won't say something. But I knew a young Muslim, he told me he's interested in journalism. I told him, learn science of hadith with us, study mustalah. You will be the top journalist in your class, but he didn't learn with us. Truthful information or truthful news can be a means for definite knowledge. Let's look at Imam An-Nasafi's summary of the matter, and we'll save the details for next week. I'll just read the English. So An-Nasafi said, accurate news is of two kinds. One of the two is the successive mass report, the Mutawatir report, which is the confirmed word of mouth report by a folk who's conspiring to a lie is inconceivable. That means so many people reported what they witnessed. Yani, more people than what's normally possible for them to conspire to a lie. And all of these people conveyed this report of what they witnessed. So it's based on senses. To a group as large as they are. And so on. And the news kept getting transmitted like this at each level. One large body to the next large body. This is definitively accurate news, but we'll see more details, inshallah. Now we're just looking at broad picture. It is a dictator of necessary knowledge. Successive mass report is a dictator of necessary knowledge. What's necessary knowledge? Necessary knowledge is knowledge that you get without having to think about it. Necessary knowledge is knowledge that you get without having to think about it. Tawatur promotes necessary knowledge. Yes. So you might say, how's that? So I'll give you an example for now. The children, don't they know that the Kaaba exists? Even if they never saw it before? And that Prophet Muhammad existed? Though they never saw him before, alayhi salatu wassalam. Yes, they know it. They're not thinking, they're not assuming. It's not their mere reckoning or an assumption or only confident. Like, we don't believe in Prophet Muhammad like people believe in dinosaurs. They're so confident, but they're not sure really 100%. Some of them are 100% sure about something that they shouldn't be. We'll come to that, inshallah. No, they know it for sure. The Kaaba really exists. That's a fact. And the children, they know that. How do they know? They know by hearing about it over and over and over and over again. It's a successive mass report. They heard about it so much that this news imparted knowledge on them. They came to know something as it is in reality. They came to realize something as it is in reality without having to think about it. Also, that's why I'm giving you the example of the children. If I told you 40-year-old men of knowledge, then you might say, well, those are scientists and scholars and researchers. So let's not even put them into the equation. But what about the little kids who are not scientists? They're not sleuths. They know the Kaaba exists without having to think about it, because that knowledge was imparted on them by this type of accurate news. So it is a dictator of necessary knowledge, like the knowledge of the kings of old and past ages and of remote lands. And the second type of accurate news is something told by a messenger aided by a miracle, a prophet aided by a miracle. And his news is not necessary, doesn't dictate necessary knowledge. A prophet aided by a miracle, his news dictates deduced knowledge, because we needed a proof to know he's a prophet. Once we knew he was a prophet, which was by performing miracles, then we concluded that he's honest in all that he says. So it's a deduced knowledge. But the knowledge established in this way is comparable to necessary knowledge. The knowledge that you'd get from a prophet, yani, if you heard from a prophet, if you heard from a miracle wielding prophet directly, without an intermediary, not through a chain of narration, directly, no, it's not secondhand for you. A miracle wielding prophet told you directly with no intermediary, then the knowledge you get from that is like necessary knowledge in its certitude and confirmation. But it's not necessary knowledge. It's just as strong as necessary knowledge, but it's not necessary knowledge, because necessary knowledge doesn't require a proof. It doesn't require thinking. The knowledge you'd get from a miracle wielding prophet is deduced because you use this miracle as a proof. Wallahu a'lam. So we'll stop there, and then next time, inshallah, we'll read about the tawatur in more detail.